We talk about the Violence Against Women Act all the time on the show. Well, in this edition of Attorney Spotlight, Vanessa spoke with Spar and Bernstein partner and immigration attorney Shannon LaGuerre, who breaks down what VAWA is, who is eligible, and how it can be life-changing for people. Let's watch.
When someone finds themselves in an abusive relationship, they can feel trapped. This is particularly true for non-American citizens who often think they have no protection under U.S. law. The fact is that America has laws in effect to protect those in abusive and dangerous situations. With us to explain is Spar and Bernstein partner and immigration attorney Shannon LaGuerre-Maingrette. Thank you for joining me today, Shannon.
Hi, how are you? Thank you for having me.
I am great. We get so many questions on the show on VAWA, so I'm really looking forward to going a little more in depth with you. So how is domestic violence defined?
So domestic violence is defined as basically a practice and pattern of abuse. It can be emotional, it can be verbal. So basically it's used by another partner to kind of control another partner. In the cases that we have at Spar and Bernstein, it can be spouses they can be cursing at their spouse. They can be yelling at their spouse. They can also be threatening deportation. That's also deemed to be abuse. And so there's just a wide range of ways to be able to control another partner. So it's of course physical. There's also sexual, there's emotional, there's verbal.
Now, what are the statistics regarding domestic violence in the United States?
So really interestingly enough, 4.8 million women basically are deemed to suffer intimate partner violence. Also, 1 in 10 men actually experience domestic violence, according to the Center for Disease Control, whether it's in a same-sex relationship or whether it's by a woman also. So women also can be abusers, and I think it's really important to talk about that. A lot of times men will come into the office, and when they start talking to me and start telling me about their relationship, I realize that, wait a minute, you are in an abusive relationship. And sometimes they don't want to talk about it. They don't want to be identified as a victim, right? But then at that point, I'm like, we can help you. You're not obligated to be emotionally abused, to feel like you're compelled to stay with this individual because they continue to basically verbally abuse you and make you feel less than a person.
Now, are children also victims in domestic violence situations as well?
So a lot of times when children are living in a household where their parents are being abused, they're going to suffer sometimes what they call post-traumatic stress disorder. And it's just basically, it stunts their growth and their development. This is a crucial time for children when they're basically growing up. And as a result, when they see, let's say, a parent that's being abused, and the parent also is basically crying and depressed and doesn't know what to do, imagine how that can impact a child. When they grow up, unfortunately, a lot of time women who have experienced their parents being abused will also tend to be in abusive relationships. Statistics show boys basically who grow up to be men tend to also be abusive when they grow up and may also be in an abusive relation too. Also, when they're teenagers, they're prone to become very depressed, and also suicide is really high during that time. So something to take into consideration.
Now, what is the Violence Against Women Act?
So the Violence Against Women Act basically was sponsored by then Senator Joe Biden, now our president, and it was co-sponsored with another Senator, Orrin Hatch, and it was really to protect women. So Violence Against Women Act. So you had a tremendous amount of money used to basically investigate and prosecute these domestic violence crimes that are occurring against women. They basically also established an Office for Violence Against Women under the Department of Justice. It really becomes pertinent for immigrants because it was incorporated into the Immigration and Nationality Act. And so there are a lot of people who are in relationships that are abusive and they feel compelled to stay in that relationship. And the Violence Against Women Act actually liberated them. It allowed them to be able to say, I can do this on my own. I can self-petition to be able to get a green card because either A, I'm married to someone who is abusive, who is a green card holder or US citizen, so I'm in an abusive relationship. If you are a parent and your child is abusing you and that child is a US citizen, you also can basically petition for yourself. You're not obligated to stay in that relationship. You can self-petition and do it on your own. And also, if you are a child under the age of 21, and you are also in an abusive relationship, just like we were talking about, or maybe your parents are basically being abused, you can self-petition or be under your parents' petition. I think the key for why it's so pertinent for immigrants, because so many people come into my office sometimes are like, I don't want him or her to know. I'm afraid if they know that they're going to come back at me. It is completely private. They don't reach out to the abuser in regards to immigration. Even if I try to get information or I try to access information as an attorney, it's very hard. They keep it as private as possible because they understand what can happen to someone who is abused if the abuser found out. Mail doesn't have to go to the house. A lot of times they will come to my office. So it liberates a lot of immigrants to take control back of their life and to be able to do that. It's the first step, because keep in mind, as we talked about, the pattern, the practice and pattern of abusers is they want that person to feel like they don't have control. They try to basically show the person like, you're nothing. And so as a result, when you're able to do this on your own, you start to feel good about yourself. You're like, you know what, I'm doing something for me and my family, and I don't need this abuser. A lot of people don't know that parents of US citizens can be covered. If you're a parent, if I have a child and my child is abusing me, I can at that point file for VAWA. Children under the age of 21 can also self-petition if they are a victim of domestic violence, or they can be covered under their parents. 21 is a key age. So sometimes people are like, well, I'm 22, I'm 23. I've done cases where people who are up to the age of 25 are able to say that I want to be covered, but because of the abuse that I suffered, I was unable to actually file the petition. And so at that point, even if you're up to the age of 25, you certainly should reach out to our office and we can explore that further. But you just have to show the connection on why you didn't file before 21. And sometimes it's really simple to show. Can you imagine living in a house where you feel helpless? You feel like there's nothing you can do. And let's say your mother's constantly telling you, don't say anything, don't get involved. And you just feel powerless. It's not until they're 23 or sometimes 22 that they feel like that control again. And they feel like I can do this. And at that point, they can also file. Of course, people know if you're married to a US citizen or a green card holder, you can file, and if that person was abusive. You have to be married to the person, but there are a lot of people who are strong enough to say, I'm going to leave this relationship. I want nothing to do with this person any longer. They leave the relationship and they get divorced. You have 2 years from the time you get divorced and the time that you file the application where you can actually file for VAWA. So you can be divorced and still file. 2 years from the time you get divorced where you can actually file the application.
And that's really good information to know. Now, what are the requirements needed to be covered under VAWA's immigration benefits?
So basically, you have to show that you are in a bona fide marriage and that also there was extreme cruelty. So the standard is that the abuse, or the behavior that was demonstrated rose to the level of extreme cruelty. Very, very important. And that's how you're able to say it doesn't only need to be physical, but it could be emotional or verbal. So it has to rise to the level of extreme cruelty. And so again, you need to have documents to show that you guys were living together. If it's a marriage, even for children, you need to show that the parents were living together. So the same things you would do for a marriage-based adjustment of status, you need to demonstrate bills in both your names, a lease in your name. Those documents still go with the VAWA application. And a lot of people don't realize that. And that can be fatal to the case. I have been able to explain that, again, with the control, that there weren't many documents, that the abuser wanted to have everything in their name and did not want to share and put the victim, the spouse, on the documents. So for example, bills or cell phones, and they wanted to be in control of everything. And you are able to make those arguments, and they have been successful. But I think it's really important to keep in mind that you need to understand that you should have documents in both your names as much as possible. You don't have to have evidence, interestingly enough, of the actual abuse, because again, how do you prove that? A lot of people come in and are like, how do you prove abuse? How am I able to do that? A detailed statement really describing what you've been through, how you met this individual, and when the abuse started. A lot of times the abuse sometimes will happen while they're dating, And a lot of times you kind of ignore it because the person will come back and be like, oh, I'm so sorry. And then, they ask that they want to get married and everyone's all excited and everyone's ready to go. And then once you're married, it becomes consistent. It becomes an everyday ritual. And at that point, once you're able to detail that in an affidavit, that is certainly that can be used and brought in and put in with the application. These are basically thoroughly read, vetted by immigration, and is key to a really great VAWA application. Another thing that's very important is for them to be able to go and get counseling. Key. Because number one, it's good for their soul, it's good for their state of mind, it's good for their peace of mind, but also it's great for immigration because you now have a licensed therapist who is listening to this individual and what they've gone through and submitting an evaluation of why this person is suffering sometimes post-traumatic stress disorder as a result of the repeated abuse that they've had to go through. And also will recommend that they continue to go to counseling. Sometimes my clients will say, you know what, I can't afford a private therapist. They can be a little costly. And I'll send them to group counseling. So there's also group therapy sessions when it comes to domestic violence. And that is also used in our application. So you also have to show good moral character, that if you have any kind of criminal issues. So I've had a lot of clients who had some criminal issues and they had to explain it. They had to show that basically what they were either arrested for or convicted of, and whether or not that's a factor for good moral character. And you need to be able to show that too.
Just to reiterate, Shannon, because the squad needs to know, VAWA does cover male victims as well.
It does. We have a large number of male victims that come in. As I indicated before, 1 in 10 men will experience abuse. And a lot of times, again, men tend to be very embarrassed. They don't want to talk about it. And again, it really takes some time sitting down and being able to listen to your client and to hear the story of what they're going through and taking that time to say, you know what, I want you to understand that you are basically facing domestic violence, emotional abuse. I've had clients that are men that have come in and they were in what seemed to be a happy relationship, and financially things are going bad, or maybe they were in their country and they had this really glamorous job and it was like almost kind of like a long distance dating. They come here to the United States and next thing you know, the spouse is angry. Like, wait, what happened? What do you mean you can't support me? What do you mean you don't have the money to be able to contribute? And they're just angry because, again, what they were expecting, this glamorous life, no longer exists because now you have to work hard and either money is not coming in, they can't find a job. Language sometimes can be an issue. And the wives end up being very verbally abusive and making the man feel less than. A lot of times the wives will take it out on the stepchildren. And a lot of times the children are like, I'm just afraid to go outside of my room because I feel that basically I'm going to be attacked. So at that point, basically, a lot of times men don't realize it and they almost kind of blame themselves. But that in itself is abuse. No one should make you feel like you are nobody. And again, if it becomes a practice, a pattern and practice of this happening on an everyday basis or even on an every week basis, it's not acceptable. It is extremely cruel. And that is the standard that people have to keep in mind.
Okay, so I know we get so many questions and so many cases on VAWA, but can you tell us about a successful case that you have settled for a client under the VAWA Act?
I think there's so many that I have, but one that sits in my heart is a woman that had children with her husband, lives with her husband. They are together, living together, but she was being abused almost every day. And he would hold the immigration process over her and like, I'm not going to do this for you. I'm not going anywhere for you. You're going to sit here. And she didn't know what to do. She was just lost and she felt like obligated. And she would tell me, you know, he's such a good father. Like he's a provider, a good father, but just horrible to her. And that's what she would say to me. And she didn't know what to do anymore. She was just lost. And I remember she came in for a consult and I talked to her about VAWA. And I also remember she was like, I'm not going to leave him. That's really what's sad because sometimes they do feel like I have no other choice. I'm going to remain in this relationship She talked about how her mom and her dad had been in an abusive relationship and she was going to stay. But she wanted to be legal because she was afraid that she could be deported and that he kept on threatening her with that. And I filed the VAWA. Everything came to our office. It got approved. We went to the interview. She got approved. She had her green card. And I remember she looked like a different person. I felt like she had a little bit of glimmer of hope because she had that green card. So another case that sits also on my mind, and I feel we successfully represented her, was that she had called the office. She was sitting in her bathroom and was going to kill herself. And she had been through, not only was she cheated on repeatedly, but he would beat her, but also made her feel like she was not beautiful and just ugly. And I remember she called the office, and then Brad reached out to me on my cell phone, and I called her immediately. I talked to her. I told her how special she was. I called the police and the ambulance. And then I also called the suicide hotline, and they sat with all of us together. The two of us sat and talked to her, and we were telling her that she's really incredible, that she's an important person. And she was taken to the hospital. She was provided some medication. And then at that point, we basically filed a VAWA for her, and she now has her green card. It's just amazing how this could change people's lives.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. If you or someone you know is involved in a domestic violence or abusive situation, there are resources. The phone number for the National Domestic Violence Hotline is 1-800-799-7233, and their website is thehotline.org. And if you or someone you love needs to file a VAWA case, call Spar and Bernstein at 1-800-529-5465. That's 1-800-529-5465. Thank you so much, Shannon.
Thanks for watching. For more Brad Show Live, like and subscribe to our YouTube channel.